Chapter 19. Unwelcome. When the party finally came up to the ridge overlooking the kingdom of Manon, tired and sore from the hard ride, the sun was just setting. All that day they had been riding with great trepidation for what would await them. The countryside was replete with evidence of Talga's march, abandoned campsites, more footprints and tracks than they could count, discarded junk, and of course the lingering stench of gruel bodies. The enemy's flight seemed hasty, to be sure. None of the cities or villages they could see from the road looked disturbed in any way, and the tracks of the moving force never veered far from the southern highway. They had all expected to find the invaders at Shorewell, but what they saw from atop the ridge still took them by surprise. At the edge of the city, where the port stretched out into the waters of the Fourth Sea, 6 gargantuan warships were tied ashore with hundreds of people moving about them like ants, barely visible from where they were. Each of the ships was equipped with an equally large set of sails, the mainmasts and foremasts bearing the clear emblem of the Crimson Sun. The rest of the city, spread out onto the land, looked as it had when Caleb had seen it 6 years prior during the southern rebellion of the city Alamon. Then he was merely a trooper under Commander Arvis. Caleb could not have guessed the circumstances that would bring him back. It was a large establishment filled with wooden houses with rounded roofs and all surrounded by a thin wall of handcrafted bricks. The whole town at a glance was grey as rock and somehow looked wet, as if the city itself were a giant crag in the shore of the ocean. Hundreds of thin streams of smoke threaded to the clouds from the chimneys, and at the center of the city an oddly shaped building rose to a sharp point, standing out from the rest as if it had been dropped there by accident. It was their central structure, called the Flagstaff Manor. Though they could see little detail from that distance, they could almost feel the unrest emanating from within the walls. All of them took in the view, but their eyes never left the menacing ships in the port. My father was right. The invaders are in possession of the city, Caleb muttered. And it would seem more have come from Talgarth. Look at the size of those things. Anselm gasped as he stared at the ships. They could fit thousands of men into a fleet like that, Elastra added, shaking her head in disbelief. It appears they've come to take their forces back home. Look, the city is still whole. There must not have been a battle. Or the ships have brought more men with them, and they are plotting another attack, Caleb suggested. Layla gasped. Do you think Manon has joined them also? I do not know, Caleb answered, shaking his head. Manon's indifference and independence has borderlined on secretive over the past decade. It would not surprise me if their sense of survival has led them to forge such an alliance. I agree, said Elastra. Manon's High Sage, she struggled to remember his name a moment but clearly had forgotten it. Hasn't attended the councils in a long time, and High Sage Fridmorton has expressed concerns himself. We would be under the axe if they have been plotting against us. It is too early to assume that much just yet, Caleb said. At any rate, my father is in there somewhere and I am sure he can tell us more. We have to find him soon. If the situation truly is grim, we may not have much time until it's too late. Leothran eyed the city reluctantly, and slid off of Ollie's back from behind Layla. She walked to the ridge and studied the view. If you all wish to enter that city, we must think of a way through that wall other than the main entrances. We don't know the circumstances, but Talgarth has seized the city, and I am sure they are keeping a close eye on who enters and exits. It doesn't seem like anyone is doing either, Anselm observed. It was true. It was common, especially in port towns, to see a trail of merchants set up before each gate, not to mention travelers coming in and out and all along the highway, but there was no one. The city within the walls looked alive enough, but outside was utterly desolate save for themselves and some buzzards circling overhead. Do you think that man we found, mutilated, tried to escape? Perhaps that is why those creatures chased him down, Layla suggested. They all sat in silence, considering her valid thought. That could be, Elastra said. But that doesn't account for that spy you two spotted. None of it makes any sense. Well, we won't be able to understand any of it from here, Caleb said, envisioning the eerie figure standing between the trees once more. We had best get out of sight until we can find an entrance that won't attract attention. After the attack on Tritus, anybody traveling from the north would be suspicious. Especially 2 wardens and a sartir. They will be looking for me, Leothrin said quietly, a new tone lacing her voice. Was it fear? I was a very important part of their plans here, and I'm sure they are on the lookout. They know me. Don't worry about a thing, Anselm said. We won't let them take you again. Or enslave you with any evil mind jewel either. Caleb felt guilty that he had caused her injury after all she had been through, even if he knew he had merely been defending his home. He suddenly remembered his own injury. He gingerly felt the claw marks that he had received from the Fendara and grimaced. Even the light evening wind blowing up from the ocean made it sting. He felt it run from the middle of his forehead, across his right eye and onto his nose. I'll heal that, Alastra said, noticing him inspecting it. It is all right, Caleb responded. There is no time for that now. If we stay out here too long, there is a chance more of those creatures could find us. I will go take a look around the wall. You'd better hurry, said Anselm. We are looking at no more than an hour of daylight left. Not far from the ridge the hill sloped down again, and they found a small thicket of trees and tall grass to take cover in, and Caleb left immediately. Leaving his large broadsword behind, he pulled his cloak around him, pulling the cowl down, and made his way from tree to rock, rock to bushel, slowly coming towards the city wall, being sure to mentally draw his path with landmarks so he could find his way back in the dark. It was a fairly short distance, and unsurprisingly, the wall was too short and thin to have guards posted atop, as the city was not built for defense. He found a section that seemed particularly chinked, and in only a few minutes found a suitable section with enough holds for him to climb the 20-pace height of the wall. He climbed with little difficulty, and after sliding down the other side as far as he could, dropped down the rest of the way, rolling to soften his fall. He found himself on a dirt street, looking at the backside of a row of small houses, and quickly took cover in the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of fish, even though he was on the side of the city furthest from the port. He made his way down the length of the wall, ducking between storage crates, barrels and carts when he heard sudden noises. After moving down the wall for 20 minutes, he stopped suddenly and smiled. Even better than I was hoping for, he thought. The wall curved outward 5 paces, and a narrow wooden door was built right into it. A heavy bar lay horizontally across it to prevent outsiders from entering, and a large lock chained it securely. He scanned the area to see a 2-story house not far from where he was. The yard was boxed off by a high wooden fence, and behind it 4 cows stood staring at him. A cattle gate. What luck! When he returned to the small thicket where his companions were hidden an hour and a half later, they were all standing with their weapons in hand. Well met, Layla said. I was starting to worry. Did you find a way in? Caleb walked toward the provisions left from a dinner that his companions had put together, and finished the remaining food hastily. I found a cattle gate not far down the wall. There was not a sign of a single guard anywhere on the lookout for intruders. We should be able to slip through. Alone perhaps, said Alastra. But 5 of us with 4 horses. Are you sure? I am, Caleb reassured her, loading the broadsword he had left behind to Vector's back. At least for the moment. Let's move before the situation changes. Not a single man patrolling the area, Anselm said, shaking his head. Talgarth is either fearless or they are overconfident fools. They guided the animals by the reins, and followed Caleb as quickly and quietly as they could. He made his way from spot to spot, stopping at each landmark to hastily glance around for watchers before signaling for them to continue forward. He felt vulnerable moving in such a big group, and hurried them along as best he could. From anyone watching in the city, the only thing that would be visible was the glow of Leothrin's eye as it flickered in the moonlight. When they reached the cattle gate, Caleb left them briefly to climb the wall again. Moments later, they all jumped at the sudden clang of the lock on the other side of the door breaking apart under Caleb's steel sword pommel. When the bar was lifted and he opened the door, Layla was first in line with Ollie, the rest huddling closely behind her and squinting at the lights coming from the house windows. Hurry, hissed Caleb. The noise may have drawn attention. He stood aside and let them file through one by one, and pointed to a dark spot behind him further down the wall. Over there, he whispered. Quick. When they were all securely inside, He replaced the bar to the door and left the broken lock dangling on one of the brackets and joined his companions. "Well, that was easy," Anselm said, breathing a sigh of relief. Caleb pulled his cloak from behind him over his shoulders to cover up the dueling sword at his side. "We should do our best to avoid suspicion on the streets," he said. "The invaders are here. We are in the maw of the enemy now." "They are definitely here," Elastra agreed, wrapping her own cloak around her. "Nobody has come out to check that lock they surely heard break. What landowner in his right mind would neglect that?" "One that's terrified," her brother finished for her. She nodded. "Exactly." "Well, I don't want to stay on this back street all night," Layla said, as she also loaded her weapons onto Ollie's back and covered them as best as she could with the bags. "Let us get indoors." "How will we find your father, Caleb?" "He told us to come to Shorewell and no more." "I don't think you'll need to worry about that," Anselm said. "You know Sir Damon. He will find us." "I think you're right," Caleb agreed. "Let's just get to an inn for now, and if we hear nothing tonight, we can perhaps do something about it tomorrow." They all continued their walk down the dark back street, and eventually turned inward toward the city center. They only had to navigate a few back roads until the bigger streets came into view ahead, illuminated by the soft glow of lantern poles along their edges. Then they noticed the noise. They could hear commotion of all kinds and coming from every direction. Faint but definitely unnatural for night hours. General noise often came from pubs in towns until at least the second quarter of the night, but never like this. Something was not right. Distant talking and laughing poured into their shadowy alleyway from ahead. The buildings on either side of them were common houses. One was silent and dark, but from the other such ruckus echoed through the walls there could have been a festival inside. When their party reached the end of the alley, Caleb motioned for them to wait, and slowly peered around the corner into the road to see a sight that made his skin crawl. A few dozen ghouls littered the street, some huddled in groups talking in their high-pitched foul voices, others walking up and down casually as if they lived on the next block over. There were a few men too, but none were associating with the ghouls, only going in and out of what looked like taverns, shrouded in red cloaks bearing the crimson sun. Caleb pulled back into the alley, wearing a shocked expression. They were all looking at him, eagerly waiting for the report. Talgarth soldiers everywhere. Ghouls also. They all gasped except for Leothran. "Ghouls in the city?" Layla asked, appalled. "What do we do?" Caleb was shaking his head in thought. "If we walk out looking like obvious travelers, we will attract too much attention, if not an unwanted battle and untimely deaths. They could pour out of every door if we raise a concern." "Then we keep to the back roads," Leothran said. "I for one do not wish to risk being seen." They backtracked and took other roads, thin dirt walkways through lines of multi-story houses. Most of them were darkened, and only occasionally did they encounter a lantern light, which they hurried around as quickly as they could. They caught an occasional shadow peeking from house windows behind the curtains, but each of them retreated back behind cover almost immediately. At one point, the pattern of the residential roads broke as it turned sharply to a dead end. Before they could turn themselves around, however, the building in front of them pulled them unwillingly close for a better look. They were facing the backside of a broad tavern, crammed into the middle of the surrounding houses. One large window in the center of the wall showed into the common room and spilled bright lights onto the street, but it was hardly an inviting scene. They all gazed with astonishment through the glass and came as close as they dared to risk. Inside, men, women and ghouls alike filled every corner. They were laughing and shouting as some of their comrades danced on the tables, and others drank rows of ale from buckets in some sort of game. Many of them had large plates of food in front of them, and others, mostly the ghouls, lay motionless on the floor, whether from the ale or from being trampled no one could tell. A bigger man in an apron, clearly the master of the tavern, navigated around the room, carrying a dish of food and drink with a look of deep concern on his face and sweat on his brow. Hiding behind him came a few barmaids who were clearly attempting to deliver their loads to the tables, and return to the kitchen without being touched or harassed by the guests. They were not succeeding. None of them said a word as they realized the gravity of the situation. As they turned to go, Caleb stopped them. "Wait." There is a door over there that appears to lead to the kitchen. I am going in. Go in? Are you mad, Caleb? Elastra asked incredulously. I am sure that man or one of his maids will know if there is any place we can go. And I'll wager they would be happy to tell us if they know we are here to help. Are you sure you want to risk it? Anselm asked. This could turn sour. For all we know, he may trounce you himself just for being an unfamiliar face. What choice do we have? Caleb argued. We will get nowhere aimlessly wandering around out here in the streets, not to mention the extra risk we'll face on the main roads. At length they all agreed hesitantly, and huddled off to the side of the road where a dark house slept, buried behind a high stack of wooden crates. Caleb found the door unlocked and after quickly inspecting the kitchen inside through a crack, opened the door and slipped in. His eyes took a moment to adjust to the bright lantern light, and once they did he found himself face to face with two frightened barmaids holding giant tankards of ale and staring at him with wide eyes. I told you to keep that door closed, one hissed at the other. Caleb could already feel the situation curving in the direction he didn't want it to go, and spoke up at once. Peace, he said, showing both of his hands from under his cloak. I am not one of them. I apologize for just walking in, but I must speak to the master of this tavern. Just then the plump tavern master came in through the door backside first as he pushed it open with his rear. His hands were occupied with a pile of filthy dishes, and he too froze at the sight of Caleb as the door swung closed again, abruptly cutting off the loud din of the guests in the common room. Oh. Pardon me, sir, he said in the most artificially polite voice Caleb had ever heard. Everyone is in the common room, but you'll have to go around to the front. The kitchen is... I'm not a Talgathian, Caleb said, cutting him off. I apologize for the sudden intrusion, but I must have a quick word with you. The tavern master looked him up and down slowly with the utmost suspicion. His round face twisted into a mass of lines as he squinted with one eye and glared with the other. He was tall and balding, and a large moustache covered most of his mouth. After glaring at him for a moment longer, he shook his head as if shaking off a thought and turned to the women who were still staring at Caleb with wide eyes. Hurry it up with those drinks, the both of ya, he growled. Don't keep those brutes waiting a second longer. They scurried from the room, as he tossed the dirty dishes into a large tub of grey water and muttered something about losing money. Caleb stepped closer. Then I believe it is safe to say that you too are not in favor with the invaders. Bah, the man grunted. They help business enough during the day, but this is madness. They come in at unearthly hours and expect a banquet when I'm short on hands and wanting to close shop. He hardly looked at Caleb as he rushed to gather more clean dishes and stir a large cauldron that hung over a blazing fire. So what do y'all want? If y'all want a drink, it's on the house, but that's all I can offer you tonight. No drink, Caleb said. But thank you. I am traveling south from Tritus with some companions, and we are looking for accommodations. Do you know of any inns nearby that would suit us? Someplace more quiet. The man chuckled spitefully. No such place, boy. Every inn in Shorewell is full to the brim with the brutes, and a lot of the shops and houses too. They sailed in not 2 days ago, and for some reason nobody's done anything but serve them. And when did you get here anyway? Tonight? How did you? It doesn't matter, Caleb said, having received the answer he came for. He was already trying to think of an alternative to staying at an inn. Where in fate's name are we going to hide out? We will be caught as bloody beggars in the street. Tell me, sir, Caleb said. Is Manon in league with Talgarth? I must know. The man only answered after he bent down again to work the bellows under the fire. Boy, all I know is that I'm putting out what scraps of food I have left in stock on dishes that ain't been cleaned to a right nasty clientele. I've heard no such thing yet, but who knows what could be going on? Nobody knows. Thank you for your help, Caleb said in frustration and turned to go. From Tritus, are you? The man said, suddenly looking up from his work, furrowing his brow. And your clothing suggests you're no commoner. Word is starting to spread about what happened in Tritus. I'm sorry. Caleb nodded swiftly and left him to his dishes and soup. The air outside was chill.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.